Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we're going to be talking about our version of Kingdom Come, which was an insanely popular comic book that DC put out back in 1996. And in the actual comic, the way you would start the story, at least the way I would explain it, in order, would be that the Joker decides to bomb the Daily Planet, killing people who are close to Superman. And the Joker is arrested and is in police custody for the millionth time, right? And this new guy shows up named Magog. And Magog is this huge muscular dude with like a helmet that's like got these golden ram horns coming off of it. And he has this staff that shoots incredibly powerful energy blasts. And so he blows a hole in the Joker and kills him. And that's what kicks this whole timeline off. So Superman basically says you can't kill somebody who's in police custody. That's not cool. Magog goes to court, and the public decides that we need more heroes like Magog because the catch and release thing with the Joker is getting tons of people killed, right? So their whole take on it is everybody the Joker kills, that's the fault of the heroes for not finishing the Joker off. So due to public outcry, they let Magog go. And so Superman in the comic book retires. He goes to the Fortress of Solitude for years. He just stays there and he is done dealing with humanity. Meanwhile, because of Magog, a brutal new generation of anti heroes spring up in the 21st century. And one day, Magog is in Kansas and Captain Atom gets split. And just as when you split an actual atom, it causes a nuclear explosion, right? The same thing happens and it just destroys like the center of America. So ground zero is Kansas. I always assumed it was Smallville, but I don't remember them actually saying it specifically. But like all that's really left in terms of area where people have survived this cataclysm and a place where someone can stay outside of this like radiation zone is the coasts, right? So after all this happens, Wonder Woman goes to the Fortress of Solitude and basically tells Superman, you need to turn on the news. Like, look what happened when you were hands off. And so he turns on the news, and Superman at this point has got like long hair that's turning white. He's got a white beard, stuff like that. He sees all of this craziness on the news. And so after all these years, he comes out of retirement. And we find out that there's a bunch of new superheroes doing stuff now in the 21st century. And so, for instance, Wally West has a daughter who is the new Kid Flash. Dick Grayson and Starfire had a daughter named Night Star, which was kind of a mashup of Nightwing and Starfire. Um, but yeah, you get the idea. And then there were brand new heroes um, that had also been invented for this world where these stories took place. And so the story in a nutshell is basically Superman comes back and he's trying to get it all under control, so on and so forth, right? But it's a very bad situation in the future. Um, and by the time the story is over, humanity launches what is basically a nuke that happens to look like the rocket that Superman came in, and they wipe out like almost all of the world's superheroes who were having one big final battle. And when the smoke clears, uh, Green Lantern was able to erect a force field around a very small group of core characters who are either the earliest DC heroes or at the very least their namesakes. So for instance, it might not be like the original Atom, maybe it is the guy who currently goes by the name the Atom, that kind of thing. So that's the actual Kingdom Come comic book series. If I remember correctly, it was a four-part miniseries. I was lucky enough, I bought all four issues at the newsstand. I loved it. At the time, it was like my favorite comic book of all time. And so we immediately knew we wanted to do something about that in the game. And so Howard Warnes actually ran this game using his own character, Tachyon. Tachyon's real name was Kevin Johnson. He was supposed to have been a former member of the Justice League back when they were in Detroit. So that era would have been like Gypsy, yeah, I think Gypsy, Vixen, Steel, Vibe, those guys, right? It was kind of a weird era for the Justice League. A lot of people forget it ever even existed. So one of the deals with Tachyon is that um Tachyon would like show up and people had no idea who he was. And he would act really offended and go, "Hey man, I used to be in the Justice League." And they were like, "What? Like, who are you, dude?" Um, and when Howard had first started playing, the gist was that he was just putting all of his points, every time he was in a game, you get hero points, experience points that you use to make your character more powerful, right? So the longer you play, the more and more powerful your character gets. So he'd been playing for a little while, and in the book, the stats that they gave the Wally West Flash, which was at the time the current Flash, are actually kind of low, right? So Howard was faster than the Flash, and that led to a lot of confusion with certain players where they thought the Flash could move at the speed of light. Therefore, they thought Tachyon was running faster than light. I remember Greg Sheets, for instance, was really bothered by that. He wanted to enforce, physics, basically. So, so when Howard started playing with me, wanting his character to have, I can't remember what it was now, 30 APs of super speed or 31 or 32 or something like that. Um, I remember coming at it from a whole other angle. And so I kind of retconned his character and I said, "You don't actually have any super speed, you have time powers. So, yes, you can, quote unquote, move faster than the speed of light, but that means you're going to start going backwards through time." And so then Tachyon started to branch out, and he could do things like point like at an apple and make it suddenly decompose into nothing, just in a couple of seconds, things like that. So we gave him the cell rot power. But you get the gist, right? The whole theme of the character became time manipulation. And so once he figured that out, Tachyon started to move around through time. And so he would go back to earlier ages and he would interact with, for instance, characters during World War II, during the Golden Age. He would then go to the future and look around. And so that was when Howard ran this game. That was kind of the catalyst for the Kingdom Come adventure was as he's running through time, forwards through time, he gets to the Kansas explosion. And it's sort of like a wall of radiation that is moving towards him very, very slowly from his perspective, right? So he stops and he like stops time so that it's just the radiation is like just there. And so then he starts to reverse time and he follows this wall as it is sort of like slowly imploding back to Captain Atom, right? Does that make sense? And so then he sees Magog and so on and so forth. And, he gets to a safe distance and then he moves forwards through time. So he sort of watches all of the events of Kingdom Come play out. And so then he runs back in time again to 1996, which again at the time was the modern day. And it was when the Kingdom Come comic book was published. So he goes and he tells John Redbridge about all of this. And this particular John Redbridge, by the way, is now the captain of the Nematon. He's been trying to assemble heroes together and stuff like that. He and Tachyon actually become extremely good friends. So much so, Tachyon gets put in charge of security for the Nematon. So he was kind of like our Worf. Most of us guys playing were Star Trek fans. For anybody who's familiar with Star Trek: The Next Generation, Worf was the chief of security, a very popular character. So yeah, Tachyon was kind of our Worf. And we thought it was a cool idea that if something went wrong on the ship, the security officer could kind of go back in time to when it went wrong and kind of deal with it then. And then that was how we had all these conflicting personalities and stuff coexisting in the same space without like brawls and things happening all the time and so on and so forth. And no matter how tough a character was, Tachyon could kind of put him in timeout. He could just freeze him in time. So that was very cool. But at any rate, so Tachyon warns everybody on the Nematon about this guy, Magog. So the gist then is that um, Superman Red, because in our game we've always had Superman Red and Superman Blue, and they're different guys, unlike in the comics where they're usually both of them are Clark Kent for one reason or another. Our Superman Red is an alien from a whole different region of space, and so on and so forth. But the point is, since we had done the death of Superman, and that Superman was dead in our game, we had to use Superman Red. So the idea is that again, these events play out. The Joker is arrested. He's in police custody. Magog kills him. And another reason, by the way, for that was because we use real time. That means the Joker has been committing crime since the Golden Age. So he is old, right? He's just older than dirt. And we saw this as the best time to take him out of play and say, he had a good run, but he's done. So at any rate, um, we do permanently kill off, the original Joker in our game. We introduce Magog and we made him a problem. He was a Superman level threat, right? And it turns out that staff of his actually fires beams of red sun radiation, which Superman has a weakness to. There was a sequel to Kingdom Come. This is sort of a brief aside. There was a sequel to Kingdom Come called The Kingdom. And in it, Magog is in the future, gets mad at Superman and kills him. And he still is full of rage. So Magog goes back in time one day and kills Superman again and still doesn't feel any better. So he keeps making jumps one day at a time, moving backwards through time. And so heroes from the future travel back in time to the modern day because they're worried that Magog is going to create so many temporal paradoxes it will undo reality itself. The reason I mention that, though, is to highlight how tough Magog is, right? And he is like a champ when it comes to killing a Kryptonian. He's very, very good at it. Way better than most of Superman's villains. So that said, Magog kills the Joker. Magog is acquitted in court, and in our game, we end up having a fight then between Magog and Superman Red. And I'm sorry, I said Superman Red. I meant to say Superboy. Sorry. Superman Red is the one that presses the charges, but the fight is between Magog and Superboy. And Superboy gets his clock cleaned. He just gets stomped by Magog. But the thing I liked about this from a story point of view was everybody had forgotten who Superboy even was. There was this thing where it was kind of a retcon on our part, uh, where Doctor Strange had cast a spell, sort of like in the recent Spider-Man movie, and the world forgot that Superboy ever existed. Well, so after Zero Hour, now people are remembering he exists again, right? So on in and like everybody kind of feels bad for this kid. And so when he opposes Magog, it's it is symbolic really of two opposing philosophies where Superboy represents hope, right? And in like old-fashioned values and stuff like that. And then Magog represents sort of like cynicism and honestly a lot of the philosophies that we've seen take root in comic books in the 21st century. So the Kingdom Come was eerily prophetic in terms of predicting what 21st century superheroes would be like, where they're not as opposed to killing and so on and so forth. And I see that all the time. I see weird comic book stories where DC and Marvel just they feel the need to keep amping things up and being more extreme, and they like shock value and stuff like that. So at any rate, Superboy in this story represents a more wholesome, traditional superhero. And so they fight, and Superboy loses the fight, like big time. And this is televised. Um, this is another thing I should point out. It was televised by WGBS, which is not the same thing as the Daily Planet. The Daily Planet is the newspaper. Jimmy Olsen, by the way, was there. So now Jimmy Olsen is dead as of this adventure. He also had been kicking around in the Golden Age, and So, so at any rate, WGBS though is a TV station, and a lot of players were conflating the two. But WGBS covers the fight between Superboy and Magog, and even though Superboy loses the fight, right? The fight itself changed time. It means that the Kingdom Come era is really not going to happen. And so at the end of the fight, Tachyon shows up and he has like all of those characters from that future timeline. The part of it was the way Howard ran it was if their timeline is going to cease to exist, there's this advantage in GURPS called temporal inertia. And it means basically if your timeline ceases to exist, you still exist. You remember how things were before, right? We kind of see that in a way in Back to the Future, where even though Marty changes stuff, like for instance, at the end of the first movie, his dad is a successful author now, right? Marty himself, though, remembers how things used to be. So Marty seems to have temporal inertia. That is how this advantage works. And at any rate, so Howard said that Tachyon has the ability to give it to other characters at will. He can just sort of like lock them on like a quantum level into the state they are currently in so that they will not cease to exist or develop amnesia or whatever, right? So he brings back with him all of these future characters that would not otherwise exist, like Tokyo Rose and stuff like that. And basically all the original characters that Alex Ross and Mark Waid created for the Kingdom Come comic book that had never been in DC stuff before. So again, the comic was very popular. This was how we were introducing all of those characters into the game. I remember Howard in particular really had a crush on Tokyo Rose, who kind of looked like Chung Li in a way. But at any rate, so they show up and they come to Superboy's aid. Um, and then Superman Red shows up at the end of the fight and sort of tells Magog on uh he's not wishy-washy about how he puts it, that he's not from Krypton, that Magog is used to dealing with Kryptonians, and Superman Red is something called an Eldar. He's a completely different species of alien that's just as tough as Superman with none of those weaknesses at all. And so he basically says, I'm going to take your staff and shove it up your butt if you don't get out of here. And so Magog won't back down. Magog, the way Howard ran him, just was utterly and completely convinced of his own superiority, moral and physical. So he fights him and they just stomp him into the ground. And so the interesting thing is the catalyst for the change in time was that Superboy was willing to take a stand, even if he thought he was going to die, because he's been beaten bloody, for on national TV. That is what endears him in the hearts of everybody. And something we see then in this adventure too is Supergirl. And we haven't seen Supergirl and Superboy doing much together. At this point in time, by the way, this is the 90s Supergirl, where she was a girl who had a boyfriend named Buzz who got her to join a cult, kind of duped her into it, and then tried to sacrifice her. And she was bleeding. And then the Matrix Supergirl, who we've mentioned in previous adventures, who showed up in uh 1988, she was a shapeshifter, and so the Matrix Supergirl literally tries to kind of like plug the stab wound, and something goes wrong and they end up merging. And that was the in the comics, people refer to her as the Linda Danvers Supergirl, even though the name Linda Danvers got used pre-crisis, and I don't want to confuse you with the pre-crisis Supergirl, Kara Zor-El. But at any rate, the point is, this is the 90s quote unquote Earthborn Angel of Fire version of Supergirl. I'll let you guys Google it or something if you want to know more about that. But yeah, she is not only inspired by Superboy, right? This is the beginning of her falling in love with him. And spoiler, they get married and have kids. So that's another reason why this adventure was really important. You know what I mean? But but yeah, that was our version of Kingdom Come. Like we kind of did Kingdom Come, but in a way we kind of kept it from happening. At the very least, we really imported all the characters we could from Kingdom Come. That's kind of the big takeaway. But then it also sets up the beginning of a theme that we're going to keep revisiting in the game after this point, which is that struggle between sort of like heroes and anti-heroes, or the struggle between like hope and pessimism. That's going to become more and more of a deal from here on out. So that all started here. But yeah, that's it. That was our Kingdom Come adventure. I hope that you enjoyed hearing about it. If so, as always, be sure you smash that like button. That helps us out on our end. Um, check to see if you're still subscribed, because YouTube loves to unsubscribe people without telling them. And last but not least, leave us a comment. Did you read Kingdom Come? If so, what did you think about it? If you're someone who plays superhero role-playing games, have you ever played a Kingdom Come role-playing game? I would look forward to hearing about that too. And that's it. So from all of us here at the longest running superhero role-playing game on Earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.